She was Queen Victoria's favorite granddaughter, born to a quiet life in Scotland. But destiny threw her into the fire of the Spanish court. A bomb on her wedding day, a husband who blamed her for their son's illness, and a swift, brutal exile. She lost her throne and sold her emeralds to survive. Yet, this Englishwoman created the Joyas de Pasar, a jewelry collection without which no modern Spanish queen can reign. How did she turn tragedy into a legacy that sparkles on Queen Letizia today? Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. To understand the woman behind the jewels, we must start where her story began, not under the scorching sun of Spain, but in the cool, misty highlands of Scotland. Princess Victoria Eugenie, known to her family simply as Ena, was born at Balmoral Castle in 1887. She was the youngest granddaughter of Queen Victoria, affectionately nicknamed the Jubilee Baby. Growing up, Ena was a fixture in the British royal household. She was adored by the aging queen, who called her the Little Treasure. Her life seemed destined for the quiet, respectable path of a minor British princess. But one dinner at Buckingham Palace changed everything. In 1905, King Alfonso XIII of Spain came to London on a state visit. He was young, eligible, and looking for a wife. The court gossip was quite certain he would choose one of Ena's cousins. But during a banquet, the Spanish king found himself captivated by the girl with the platinum blonde hair sitting across the table. He asked his hosts who she was, ignoring the more suitable options. It sounds like a fairy tale beginning, a king spotting his queen across a crowded room, but the road to the altar was paved with obstacles. Alfonso's mother, the formidable Queen Maria Cristina, opposed the match. She feared the Battenbergs weren't royal enough, and far more ominously, she feared the hemophilia that ran in Queen Victoria's bloodline. Despite the warnings and the need to convert to Catholicism, which caused a scandal in Britain, Ena was determined. She traveled to Spain for love and a throne. But Madrid welcomed her with something far more volatile than flowers. The wedding took place on May 31, 1906. It was a day of immense splendor. Ena wore a gown of white lace adorned with lilies, and for the first time, the magnificent fleur-de-lis tiara, a wedding gift from Alfonso. After the ceremony, the newlyweds began their procession back to the royal palace. The streets were lined with 400,000 cheering people. But as their carriage passed number 88 Calle Mayor, the celebration turned into a nightmare. An anarchist threw a bouquet of flowers from a balcony. Hidden inside was a bomb. The only reason Ena survived was that, at that precise moment, she had turned her head to look at St. Mary's Church. The explosion killed roughly 24 people. When the smoke cleared, Ena was physically unharmed, but her beautiful wedding dress was speckled with the blood of a guard who had been riding beside them. Her reaction tells us everything about her character. Amidst the horror, she displayed a calmness that stunned the Spanish court. She didn't succumb to hysterics. She proceeded to the palace to fulfill her role. But it was a terrifying omen. The smoke from the wedding day bomb eventually cleared, but the atmosphere awaiting the new queen inside the royal palace of Madrid was hardly less suffocating. Ena had survived the assassination attempt, but now she had to survive the Spanish court, a world governed by rigid etiquette and dominated by a woman who had never really wanted her there, her mother-in-law, Queen Maria Cristina. Maria Cristina was a formidable figure, an Austrian archduchess who had ruled as regent and made no secret of her wish for Alfonso to marry a Habsburg cousin, not a minor Battenberg princess. But when the marriage went ahead, she made a gesture, a peace offering in the form of a magnificent jewel. For the wedding, Maria Cristina commissioned the court jeweler, Anne Serena, to create a diamond and pearl tiara. It was a piece rich in history. The Queen Mother had actually dismantled some of her own jewelry to provide the stones for this gift. It was designed in a Louis XVI style, featuring a tall, heart-shaped motif topped with 8 oriental pearls. It was grand, traditional, and a very public welcome to the family. Usually, a new daughter-in-law would wear such a gift constantly to show gratitude, but Ena did something quite bold. She barely touched it. In fact, there are no known photographs of her wearing this tiara in its original form. It seems the design simply did not suit her taste, or perhaps it carried too much weight of a mother-in-law who disapproved of her. Instead of letting it gather dust, Ena took matters into her own hands. In the early 1920s, she brought the piece to Cartier in Paris. She had the entire structure dismantled. The diamonds and those lustrous pearls were reset into a completely new, modern design, featuring scrolling diamond laurel wreaths surrounding 7 large pearls, with a single pearl sitting at the very top. It was a drastic makeover. To take apart a wedding gift from a powerful mother-in-law is a statement, isn't it? I must admit, the result is stunning. It became a signature piece for Queen Sofia, and today, we see it worn by Queen Letizia. It looks elegant and balanced, a testament to Ena's impeccable eye. But while she could command Cartier to reshape platinum to her will, there were other forces in her life she was powerless to control. The pressure on Ena to produce an heir was immense. Less than a year after the wedding, she gave birth to a son, Alfonso. But the triumph turned to tragedy when it was discovered the prince inherited hemophilia, the royal disease carried by Queen Victoria's line. The revelation shattered King Alfonso XIII. He reportedly never forgave Ena, and the warmth of their courtship was quickly replaced by a chilling distance and infidelity. Isolated in a court that viewed her as a foreigner with tainted blood, Ena found refuge in her jewelry box. As the king grew colder, her appearance became more magnificent. It was as if she used diamonds as armor. If she could not be loved as a wife, she would be unassailable as a queen. And no jewel served this purpose better than the most spectacular gift she received from her husband in happier times: the great fleur-de-lis tiara. Known in the family simply as La Buena, the good one, this piece is the absolute zenith of the Spanish collection. Commissioned from Anserena in 1906, it was a wedding gift from Alfonso, symbolizing the very essence of the monarchy. The tiara is a masterpiece of platinum and diamonds, featuring 3 enormous fleur-de-lis motifs. These stylized lilies are the heraldic symbol of the House of Bourbon. When you wear this tiara, you are literally wearing the dynasty. Originally, the design was closed, wrapping around the head almost like a crown, which suited the voluminous hairstyles of the Edwardian era. It must have been incredibly heavy, both physically and symbolically. Ena wore it this way on her wedding day, a glittering halo above her lace veil. But just as she modernized the pearl tiara, she eventually adapted La Buena. As fashion changed in the 1910s, she had Anserena open the back, transforming it into the sweeping, majestic diadem we recognize today. This tiara became her signature. We see it in her most majestic portraits, the platinum scrolls swirling around massive diamonds, framing her face with an aura of untouchable regality. She wore it to state openings, to galas, and later she would take it with her into exile. While she was forced to sell other treasures to survive, she clung to the fleur-de-lis. It was never just an accessory, it was her identity. Today, when we see Queen Letizia wearing La Buena for a state banquet, we are struck by its blinding brilliance. It is undeniably beautiful. The brilliance of the fleur-de-lis tiara could outshine almost anything, but it could not blind Queen Ena to the gathering storm clouds of 1931. The political ground in Madrid had been trembling for years, but in April of that year, the earth finally gave way. Municipal elections were held across the country, and the results were effectively a referendum on the monarchy itself. The people voted for a republic. On April 14th, the Second Spanish Republic was proclaimed. King Alfonso XIII, wanting to avoid a civil war, made the decision to leave immediately. He departed by car for Cartagena, leaving Ena and their children behind in the royal palace to pack up a dynasty's life into a few trunks. It was a chaotic, terrifying departure. Outside the palace gates, crowds were already gathering, shouting for the Republic. Inside, Ena had to decide what to take and what to leave behind, knowing she might never return. She prioritized the portable wealth. The tiaras, the necklaces, the loose stones. These were wrapped up and hidden in luggage. She left Madrid by train the next day, crossing the border into France. She had arrived in Spain as a hopeful bride with a bomb at her feet, and she was leaving as an exile with a broken marriage. The reunion with the king in Paris was brief and bitter. Their relationship, already fractured by hemophilia and infidelity, finally snapped under the pressure of losing the throne. Alfonso went to Rome, while Ena eventually settled in Switzerland, at a villa called Vieille Fontaine near Lausanne. But let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be a woman who yesterday was a queen with palaces at her disposal, and today must sit at a hotel desk counting bills to ensure she can pay for her stay? It is a precipitous fall. The jewels she carried across the border were no longer just ornaments of state. They were her insurance policy. They were the only thing standing between her family and destitution. And among those saved treasures was a set of emeralds with a backstory so fascinating, it sounds like the plot of a heist movie. While the diamonds of the Bourbons were grand, Ena possessed a personal treasure that came from her own history. Her godmother was none other than Empress Eugenie of France, the widow of Napoleon III. The Empress had lived in exile in England and was very close to Queen Victoria's family. When she died in 1920, she left Ena a bequest. It arrived in the form of a fan case. You can imagine the scene. Ena opening the bequest, perhaps expecting a grand parure, and finding a fan. It must have seemed a modest, sentimental token, but the Empress had a mischievous streak and a sharp mind for finance. Sometime later, Ena examined the case more closely and discovered a false bottom. Hidden underneath the fan, tucked away to avoid inheritance taxes, were 9 enormous, square-cut emeralds weighing a staggering 196 carats. These weren't just any stones. They were rumored to have been taken from the crown of Napoleon III himself. It was a secret inheritance, passed from one exiled empress to a future exiled queen. Ena wasted no time in making them her own. She commissioned the Spanish jeweler Sanz to set them into a necklace, and later she turned to Cartier to create a more fashionable Art Deco design. She wore them constantly. In those iconic photographs for Life magazine taken at her Swiss villa, you can see her wearing these emeralds. They were her link to her godmother and a symbol of her own imperial lineage. But as the years of exile dragged on, the reality of her financial situation began to weigh heavily. These emeralds could have remained a cornerstone of the Spanish royal collection forever, but history and necessity had other plans. Their trail, which began in the French court, abruptly vanishes from the Spanish line, only to reappear in a treasury thousands of miles away. By the early 1960s, Ena's expenses were mounting. She was generous to her family, and there was a very specific, very expensive event on the horizon: the wedding of her grandson, Juan Carlos, to Princess Sofia of Greece. The grandmother of the groom wanted to contribute, to ensure the House of Bourbon maintained its dignity even without a throne. And so, the decision was made. The emeralds had to go. In 1961, Queen Ena consigned the emerald necklace, along with a brooch and a ring, to an auction house in Bern. It must have been a painful parting. These stones were not just capital, they were memories of her godmother and her days of glory. But Ena was practical. She sold the green fire to secure her grandson's future. The buyer at that auction was reportedly the famous jeweler Harry Winston. And here is where the story takes a fascinating international twist. Winston was known for recutting and resetting historic stones. Around this same time, the Shah of Iran was looking for jewels for his new wife, Empress Farah Diba. If you look at the tiara and necklace created by Harry Winston for Empress Farah, you will see 7 magnificent emerald drops. Many gemologists and historians are convinced that these are, in fact, Ena's emeralds, recut and given a new life in Tehran. The emeralds may have been sold to secure the future, but they were not the only treasures in Queen Ena's collection to undergo a dramatic transformation. In fact, when you look closely at the history of her jewelry box, you realize that Ena was constantly restless with her gems. She didn't just own jewelry, she edited it. She dismantled tiaras, swapped stones, and commissioned new settings, as if she were trying to mold her life into a shape that fit her better. And nowhere is this clearer than in the story of her spectacular aquamarines. The aquamarine parure is one of the few grand sets that actually stayed within the family, though it looks very different today than it did when it first arrived in Madrid. It began its life as a wedding gift from King Alfonso XIII, a tiara by the Spanish jeweler Ena, originally set with drop pearls. But as the 1920s approached and fashion shifted toward the sharp lines of Art Deco, Ena decided the pearls felt dated. She removed them and replaced them with 7 magnificent briolette-cut Brazilian aquamarines. To match this new look, she assembled a truly massive parure, a sautoir necklace with a huge pendant, a bracelet, a ring, and a brooch. It was a sea of cool blue, perfect for her fair complexion. But the story of this tiara doesn't end with Ena. In 1935, she gave the set as a wedding gift to her eldest daughter, Infanta Beatriz. The Infanta loved the stones, but there was a problem. The original Anserina frame was incredibly fragile. It simply wasn't strong enough to support the weight of those heavy Brazilian aquamarines. So, the Infanta took a page out of her mother's book. She took the tiara to Bulgari in Rome and asked them to remake it. Bulgari created the design we see today, a series of interlocking diamond circles, very similar to the famous Grand Duchess Vladimir tiara owned by the British royal family. It was a brilliant solution, sturdy enough to hold the aquamarines, but versatile enough to be worn without them as an all-diamond loop tiara. Today, this piece is owned by Ena's great-granddaughter, Princess Sibylla of Luxembourg. It is a survivor, having weathered exile and reconstruction, much like the women who wore it. However, not every piece in Ena's collection was lucky enough to be saved. If we open the inventory of her life, we find a section that reads like a mystery novel, a list of the lost treasures. The most frustrating loss concerns her turquoises. Originally, this was a magnificent full parure born from 2 different courts. For her wedding, her British aunt and uncle, King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, gave her a turquoise necklace and earrings. To complete the set, King Alfonso commissioned his court jeweler, Anserina, to create a matching tiara topped with small diamond stars. In early photographs, Ena looks majestic wearing these pieces together, but Ena was never sentimental about settings. As the flowery style of the Edwardian era gave way to the sharp lines of Art Deco, she decided to completely edit this collection. She felt the classic English necklace was too short, so she had it remodeled into a long, fashionable sautoir reaching down to her waist, with the earrings elongated to match. She was even more ruthless with Alfonso's tiara. She dismantled it entirely to commission a new, modern design from Chaumet. But even that wasn't enough. Years later, she removed the blue stones from the tiara entirely and replaced them with diamonds. This entire edited collection, the long sautoir and the now all-diamond tiara, was inherited by her daughter, Infanta Maria Cristina. But the Infanta lived a quiet life and had little use for such grand jewels. One by one, they left the family. First, she sold the diamond tiara at Christie's in 1984. 3 years later, in 1987, she auctioned off the necklace and earrings. Today, both the gift from the King of England and the commissioned crown of the King of Spain rest in private safes, separated and unseen by the public for decades. Finally, we must mention a piece that connects Ena directly to her grandmother, Queen Victoria. This was the strawberry leaf tiara. It was a deeply sentimental piece, designed by Prince Albert himself for Queen Victoria, featuring rubies and diamonds. It passed to Ena's mother, Princess Beatrice, who loaned it to Ena for several important portraits. Ena looked majestic in it, wearing the legacy of the British throne while sitting on the Spanish one. While the mystery of the missing turquoises lingers like a ghost in the archives, the fate of Ena's most significant treasures was not left to chance. As she grew older, living in her villa in Lausanne, Queen Ena looked back at the ruins of other European monarchies. She saw how great collections were scattered by inheritance feuds or sold off piece by piece to pay debts. She had already been forced to part with her emeralds, and she was determined that the core of the Spanish royal identity would not suffer the same fate. So, in 1963, 6 years before her death, she sat down to write a codicil to her will. In doing so, she created something entirely new in the history of the Spanish monarchy. She designated a specific group of jewels as las joyas de pasar, literally, the jewels to be passed on. These were not to be personal property to be divided among her children. They were strictly tied to the head of the dynasty. The will specified that these pieces should pass to her son, Don Juan, the Count of Barcelona, with the express instruction that he should then pass them to his son, Juan Carlos. In her mind, these jewels belonged to the crown of Spain, even if that crown currently existed only in exile. The list reads like a roll call of magnificence. It includes, of course, the great fleur-de-lis tiara, La Buena, which we discussed earlier. It includes a necklace of 37 immense pearls, and a pair of diamond earrings featuring large solitaires surrounded by smaller stones. It also lists the Peregrina pearl brooch, a pendant featuring a gray pearl surrounded by diamonds from which hangs a pear-shaped pearl. There is something incredibly moving about this legal document. Think about her situation. She had no throne, no palace, and her husband was long dead. She was living in a republic's world. But by creating the Joyas de Pasar, she was acting with the foresight of a reigning queen. She was saying to history, "We will return, and when we do, we will look the part." Among the items she bound to the crown, there is a pair of jewels that Queen Letizia wears frequently today. They are 2 massive diamond bracelets, known simply as las pulseras gemelas, the twin bracelets. They are modern, heavy, and incredibly stylish. But their origin story is one of the most poignant tales in Ena's life. These bracelets were not bought in a shop. They were born from the destruction of a crown. When Ena was queen in Madrid, she possessed a small diamond crown, or coronita, made by Anserena. It was a beautiful piece, set with emeralds and rubies, which she wore for the solemn opening of Parliament. It was the symbol of her constitutional role. But in exile, a crown is a painful thing. It is a relic of a job you no longer have, a reminder of a country you cannot enter. Ena realized she would never wear it again. So, she made an unsentimental decision. She took the coronita apart. She removed the colored stones and gave them to her daughters. But the diamonds? She took those to Bulgari and had them remounted into these 2 broad, magnificent bracelets. And every time Queen Letizia clasps them on today, she is wearing the literal deconstructed authority of the past. Finally, the Joyas de Pasar includes a necklace that tells the story of Ena's marriage, perhaps better than any biography. This is the Great Diamond Riviere. When she married Alfonso XIII, he commissioned Anserena to make a diamond collet necklace, a single strand of 30 large, high-quality diamonds. It was a stunning wedding gift. But Alfonso established a tradition. For anniversaries, birthdays, and celebrations, he would give Ena more loose diamonds, chatones, to add to the chain. Over the years, the necklace grew. And grew. Eventually, it became so long that it was worn as a sautoir, reaching down her waist, or doubled up into 2 heavy strands. By the early 1930s, it comprised roughly 100 diamonds. Historians often look at this ever-growing necklace with a skeptical eye. We know that Alfonso was unfaithful. We know the marriage was strained by the tragedy of hemophilia. One cannot help but wonder, were these diamonds tokens of genuine affection, or were they peace offerings? Were they guilt rocks, given to smooth over the cracks in their relationship? Whatever the motivation, Ena loved this necklace. It was said that even when she wasn't wearing it, she would hold it up to the light, playing with the stones, admiring their fire. The diamonds of the Joyas de Pasar were destined to return to the Spanish throne, but for the woman who codified them, the journey home was far longer and far more uncertain. Queen Ena spent 37 years in exile. She watched from afar as Spain endured a civil war and a dictatorship, living out her days in the quiet elegance of Lausanne. But history granted her one final, poetic mercy. In 1968, she returned to Spain. The occasion was not a state funeral or a political negotiation, but a family celebration, the baptism of her great-grandson Felipe. It is incredibly moving to picture this 80-year-old woman stepping off the plane in Madrid. The last time she had stood on Spanish soil, in 1931, she was fleeing a palace under siege, her ears ringing with the shouts of crowds demanding a republic. Now, nearly 4 decades later, she returned as the matriarch, holding the infant who would grow up to become the current king, Felipe VI. The circle had finally closed. She had secured the jewels for the crown, and she had lived long enough to bless the child who would inherit them. Ena died just a year later, in 1969, in Switzerland. Initially, she was buried there, far from the scorching sun of Castile. But in 1985, her remains were brought back to Spain and interred in the royal vaults at El Escorial. She rests there now, finally reunited with her husband, Alfonso XIII, and the sons she mourned so deeply. But if you want to meet the real Ena, not the marble figure in a crypt, but the vibrant woman who loved jazz, reading, and speed, you don't need to go to El Escorial. You need to go to the Royal Palace of Madrid right now. Currently, a major exhibition titled Victoria Eugenia is taking place at the Gallery of the Royal Collections. It is a groundbreaking event, the first time a monographic show has been dedicated solely to a Spanish queen. It runs until April 2026, and it offers an unprecedented look into her world. Curators have brought together more than 350 objects, many coming directly from the royal collections, or on loan from places like the Prado and the British Royal Collection Trust. What makes this exhibition so special is that it reconstructs her private life. We see the recreation of her private apartments, filled with the things she actually touched and loved. You can see her books, her bottles of perfume, her embroidered morning gowns, and the silks she chose to decorate her rooms. It moves beyond the official portraits by de Laszlo or Sorolla and shows us the woman who modernized the role of a consort. We see her not just as a figurehead, but as a mother, a humanitarian who reorganized the Red Cross, and a trendsetter who brought English customs to the Spanish court. If you happen to be in Madrid between now and April 2026, I urge you to visit. It is a rare chance to walk through the physical remnants of a life that bridged the Victorian era and the modern age. But if you cannot make the trip, do not worry. You can simply look at the news the next time there is a gala dinner in Madrid. When you see Queen Letizia, smiling and confident, wearing those massive twin bracelets or the blinding sparkles of the fleur-de-lis tiara, you are seeing the Victoria Eugenia exhibition in motion. You are seeing the survival of a legacy. Ena may have been born in a Scottish castle and died in a Swiss villa, but her spirit and her diamonds are very much alive in the heart of Spain. They say diamonds are cold, but Victoria Eugenia's story proves otherwise. They can hold the memory, the pain, and the ultimate triumph of the woman who wore them. She may have lost her throne in 1931, but through the Joyas de Pasar, she ensured that her legacy would reign forever. What do you think? Was she right to bind these treasures so strictly to the crown? Or was it a harsh decision for a mother to make? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe. There are many more vaults waiting to be opened.